If you've spent any time online recently, you will know that video game discourse has been a bit of a hellscape, and the absolutely insane backlash to Mixtape really got me thinking that something about how we engage with video games is fundamentally broken. And look, I see you. You've already had some gut reaction to what I just said. Mixtape has caused quite the stir, and depending on who you ask, the circumstances surrounding that controversy are going to be completely different. The game has received nothing but critical praise from mainstream outlets, and at the time of writing, a very positive rating on Steam, and without looking at social media, you would probably never have gotten the memo that anything was awry. But if you've been on Twitter, you've been told that Mixtape is an industry plant. You've been told that it's an overhyped, astroturfed scam developed by the daughter of one of the richest men on the planet, who also bought those review scores. You've heard about licensed music that's impossible for an indie outlet to afford, a game that entirely plays itself, a game that is just made to push an agenda, and a game that isn't even a game, actually. There's just one massive problem with this narrative. It's just not fucking true. The discussion around Mixtape has been one of the most frustrating things I've seen in a long time, as all the standard grifters manufacture outrage over a game that, regardless of whether you like it or not, is so fundamentally inoffensive that it shouldn't have even registered to these people, let alone have become the next front of the video game culture war. Here's the thing though, it's incredibly easy to concoct a controversy if you're willing to lie through your teeth. When it comes to the Mixtape discourse, the waters have been so muddied by intentional dishonesty and genuine misinformation, it's made it almost impossible to know what's true and what is pure, unadulterated grift. So in this video, we're going to talk about exactly that. Now, there's a reason I'm talking about this now and not 2 weeks ago when the discourse was just insane. And that's because it seemed like every single day the story was shifting as to the problems that people had with the game or its funding. So I wanted to wait until the dust had settled just a little bit until addressing what truly went wrong here. And if you've seen any discussion about it, that starts with whether or not Mixtape is even a game to begin with. Every once in a while, there are games that release that definitely push the boundaries of what we consider to be video games, the most notable of which being Dear Esther, a game that released in 2014 and immediately drew ire from critics and gamers alike. Its gameplay was very simplistic, involving walking between locations and listening to the narration. I didn't really like it, to be honest, but it arguably helped to pioneer the type of video game that got us into this whole debacle. We hear more and more about walking simulators as a genre, but it's easy to forget that this term was actually used pejoratively to describe games like this. Firewatch, The Stanley Parable, despite critical praise, these games faced a fair amount of criticism from online audiences, and understandably to some degree, as their focus on storytelling over interactivity could definitely alienate a certain type of person that require the games they play to be extremely playable, for lack of a better term. Regardless of that, I think that as time has passed, you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find someone that would argue extremely strongly that something like Firewatch isn't a video game. There's enough interactive elements that it sort of crosses this imaginary threshold in a way that something like Dear Esther didn't. So, what exactly happened with Mixtape then? Look, almost immediately after the critical response landed and people actually started playing Mixtape, a narrative on Twitter very quickly began to take hold. The 10 out of 10 reviews flooded in, and a bunch of content creators that would normally have not paid any attention to something like Mixtape probably picked up the game to see what all the fuss was about, and due to its focus on storytelling over interactivity, hey, we're seeing a pattern here, almost immediately the same talking points started to emerge. Straight away, the same people you always expect to complain about video games on Twitter started questioning the review scores, not on the basis of the game's quality, but whether or not it even is a game in the first place. This isn't a game, it's an interactive movie, shifted to the game literally plays itself and you do not have to pick up the controller at all within 24 hours, and the story was set. A game with limited interactivity, with very high review scores, was now the target of a misinformation campaign, the likes of which we're unfortunately seeing more and more frequently in the space. So, to get some questions out of the way, is Mixtape a video game? By every single measurable metric, of course it is. It is significantly more interactive than some of these walking sim style games, and that interactivity is a core part of the experience. As the story unfolds, you have to control your character through space. You have to interact with the world and the characters within it. It is by no means the deepest gameplay experience ever, but to claim that it's not a video game, I think, is obtuse at best. Can you finish Mixtape without touching your controller? Absolutely fucking not. It is just a blatant lie that was pushed by so many people on Twitter for engagement. It's just untrue in every single sense of the word. The game does not play itself. It is substantively false. There are some sections that require minimal player input and some on-rails moments, but they are nearly always bookended by more involved sections that will not, I repeat, will not progress without your input. So, as the usual suspects began to take notice of the traction that Mixtape was gathering, these people immediately started to muddy the waters around what exactly the game is in order to discredit it. It's clear that it didn't even matter what was true anymore. To the content machine, Mixtape and its glowing reviews were the result of a global conspiracy between a 17-person indie studio from Melbourne, Australia, and every major video games publication. The term industry plant gets thrown around a lot when we talk about the music industry. The idea that an artist can sort of feign a grassroots upstart while simultaneously being backed, in secret of course, by some of the biggest record labels and their rich families is not exactly new. Everybody loves an underdog, and the sense of authenticity that comes along with that is something that's almost exclusively beneficial for an artist to have. So it does seem possible that an artist might intentionally hide their industry connections in order to seem more indie. I tend to push back a little bit on this phrase, even in the music industry, where it often seems to be levied as an attack against artists that someone doesn't like, rather than people legitimately posing as indie artists, and does get disproportionately used against women. And as such, there are people that would argue that even in the case of the music industry, the term industry plant is broadly irrelevant. Now, I bring this up because you can't look at any discussion about Mixtape online without seeing the term industry plant regurgitated everywhere, along with accusations of astroturfing, which I think is ridiculous, but we will get there. So, let's lay out some facts. Mixtape is a game that was made by Beethoven and Dinosaur, a very small studio founded by Australian rock musician Johnny Galvatron, who toured extensively in Australia and played as the supporting act for Def Leppard in the late 2010s. The studio released their first game, The Artful Escape, in 2021, a unique narrative adventure about a guitarist finding his place in the world, which reviewed relatively well, sitting at a strong 80 on OpenCritic and a 91% very positive on Steam. Both this game and Mixtape were published by one of the most well-known publishers of small games, Annapurna Interactive. Annapurna have published a lot of games over the years, like Stray and Neon White, and one of my favorite games ever, Outer Wilds. If you know, you know. Annapurna was founded by film producer Megan Ellison. Yes, that Megan Ellison, the daughter of billionaire Larry Ellison, which I must be clear is not exactly a secret. The game received an approximately 90,000 Australian dollar grant from the Victoria State Government, which is completely standard practice in Australia. So the studio has some pedigree when it comes to the music industry, as well as producing a well-received video game, and its funding is entirely transparent. So how the fuck is Mixtape an industry plant? Genuinely, I want someone to tell me in the comments, because I've seen this term thrown around at least 100 times. There is no dishonesty here. You can personally go and verify every single thing that I've said with no issue. To act like this studio is somehow hiding its funding is just a lie, plain and simple. And it isn't just that, right? I don't think I've seen a bigger group of people simultaneously develop collective amnesia about how video game publishers function. Publishers provide funding to studios. The studios actually make the games. I've seen people say that Megan Ellison personally made the game, which is just not true. Hell, I've seen people say that Larry Ellison, the owner of Oracle, made the game. There's also this argument that's popped up over and over on Twitter touting the idea that Mixtape is a fake indie game, despite fitting the mold of practically every single category that the industry has considered to be indie in the past. While it's true for a game to be truly independent, you'd imagine that it would be completely self-funded and published, but as costs have increased, that definition had to expand as well. The title indie now typically refers to games that are creatively independent, often developed by small teams, and smaller publishers have been providing funding to video games like this for years now. Devolver Digital, Outer Sloth, Nicalis, the list goes on, are all what we would consider to be indie publishers because they publish, get this, indie games. I've seen an argument start to rear its head again, and that is if a video game has a publisher, regardless of its scope, or team size, or creative control, or budget, it can no longer be considered an indie game. And that definition is all well and good, except that people wield it so selectively that it is completely devoid of meaning. Take a game like Journey, a game made by 14 people back in 2012, and one that I have never seen a single person question its indie status, and rightfully so. Its scope and scale and team size and creative independence are ostensibly what make Journey an indie game, but it was published by Sony. Yes, $136 billion market cap Sony. One could make the argument that a video game published by Sony is no longer an indie game. I think it's a pretty weak argument given the circumstances, but I can sympathize with the idea. Now we have publishers like the aforementioned Devolver Digital that only finance smaller scope projects with the same limited restriction. Indie publishers, as you will, right? Annapurna Interactive, despite being owned by Megan Ellison, is one of these companies. Whether you like it or not, Mixtape does fall into the same category of video game. It's small in scope, it's developed by a small team of people, and is funded transparently through an investment. If having a publisher makes a game not indie, then that also applies to games like Balatro or Hotline Miami, which, I'm sorry, but that's fucking ridiculous. And regardless of any of this, as far as I can tell, neither the developer or the publisher have ever made the claim that Mixtape is an indie game. So I'm not even sure why this is such a contentious issue when that label has been prescribed by the very people that want to tear it down. So we've established that Mixtape is in fact a video game. It's not hiding its financial ties, and both Beethoven and Dinosaur and Annapurna have been upfront and honest about the context surrounding its development and what the game actually is, which means it's the perfect time to dive into literally my least favorite topic on the internet. Music licensing, yeah! Another really common argument that people have had against Mixtape is regarding its soundtrack. The claim that it's almost impossible for a small studio to secure the rights to licensed music seems to have spread almost everywhere that the game is being talked about, and like everything before it, the main narrative that's formed around this idea just completely ignores the truth of the situation. It's a common theme here, but the devs have, again, been open about how the project came together. The soundtrack was apparently put together first, and the game was then built around it. They hired a music supervisor and have also spoken at length in interviews about the process of securing, or in a lot of cases, not securing the rights to use certain music in the game. So the claim is, from my understanding, that licensed music is too expensive to ever be used in a project like this, and that it can only be the result of some intense push using Megan Ellison's industry connections to strong-arm the songs into the game. And if you didn't know anything about music copyright or licensing, maybe. But I actually studied sound production at university, which included some lengthy discussion about music distribution, so I actually do know a little bit about this, and hopefully I can clear some things up. It's true that music licensing can be expensive, I'm not going to deny that, but it's clear the way that this story has unfolded on Twitter is that these people Googled how much music licensing can cost and took the highest possible estimates and applied that logic to Mixtape as a project. The truth is that licensing costs exist on a spectrum, and they can vary based on the type of project that they're going to be used in, the actual use case, like whether or not they'll be put on a radio station in something like GTA, or be the actual focus of the game in something like Mixtape, the expected revenue the project will generate, and what I will call the cultural impact of the tracks themselves. When GTA 5, a video game that has generated over $8 billion in revenue, asks to use Queen and Kendrick and the Black Eyed Peas for their in-game radio stations, the labels responsible obviously have a lot more sway in the amount of money they'll be able to squeeze out of Rockstar. They ask for some of the biggest songs in the world from some of the most successful artists in the world, and they get charged accordingly, i.e. the upper end of the Google estimate or higher in some cases. But when Johnny Galvatron goes to Devo or Billy Corgan and says, hey, I run a small video game studio and we're working on a project that is celebrating your music specifically, like I literally want to make a video game about your song. It's just common sense that in that instance, Galvatron and Annapurna would be able to negotiate a better price with the artists and their labels. Not only is this use case more beneficial for said artists, it practically acts as advertising for some of their lesser known songs, but they're also fundamentally aware of the smaller nature of the project, and their licensing costs can be negotiated further downwards due to that. Yes, even perpetual licenses change in price depending on their use case. Now, obviously, I'm not going to speculate on the exact prices as I don't know the numbers, but I would bet big money that it's a hell of a lot less than what your typical grifter suspects are claiming. And just to be clear, obviously the music licenses were paid for by the publisher. That is literally their role in the business transaction of making a fucking video game. They pay for the game and get royalties back based on the sales. You have not uncovered some global conspiracy by suggesting that Annapurna helped to secure the licenses for the music in Mixtape, because that is their job. This is not the slam dunk that you think it is. The last major point that I feel has been significant in the Mixtape discourse is the overwhelmingly positive critical reception, which has led to many an accusation of astroturfing, with people online claiming that literally every single person with a positive thing to say about Mixtape has been paid personally by Megan and Larry Ellison, and it's impossible that they just enjoy the game for what it is. Review scores and what the community thinks about them have been a core pillar of video games discussion over the years, especially when they don't align with people's expectations or their opinions of specific games. Mixtape isn't the first game to receive mass critical appeal, nor will it be the last, but judging by the reaction to those scores, it definitely appears to have been a pain point for some. You see, Mixtape was actually the highest rated game of 2026 on OpenCritic for the first few days following its release, before a few more critical reviews were posted later on, notably PC Gamer rating the game a 74, which still had people complaining that the score was too high. You'll see talk about expensive goodie bags sent to influencers and journalists, and that they're conspiring against you because an Australian video game developer made a game that appealed to them personally. Now, you can make an argument that a gift set sent to reviewers might sway people's opinions one way or the other, and I'll even agree. That is valid criticism of review culture and access journalism, but the fact of the matter is that this has been standard practice for literally decades now. And if sending journalists a pack of bubblegum and a CD player was enough to make every single person who reviewed the game give it a 10 out of 10, if it was that easy, why the hell doesn't every single AAA publisher do the same thing? Microsoft has a hell of a lot more money than Annapurna does, but just look at something like Avowed. 7 out of 10, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5. I promise you, the Mixtape reviews are not the result of Annapurna systematically paying off every single reviewer on the planet. It is literally people having different opinions about the same thing, and that is okay as long as we're being honest about it. It seems that every time a controversial video game releases, the internet collectively forgets what a review actually is. It isn't some grand declarative statement on the objective quality of a product. It's not an arbiter of the truth. If IGN gives a game 10 out of 10, it must be a masterpiece. A review is the opinion of the person that wrote it, and that's all that it is. And here's the thing. You can read those reviews and understand how those people came to their own conclusions. And yeah, you are also allowed to disagree with them, but that doesn't change what a review actually is. It's just the opinion of some fucking guy on the internet, and if you don't like it, just don't worry about it. Eurogamer or GameSpot or IGN, they are not the authority on what you think. Come to your own conclusions and talk about them if you want. But man, we have to stop pretending like these companies are making declarative statements of fact or are even claiming to do so. I think the fundamental problem is that people want their opinion to be reinforced by some outside party. If they think something's bad, but IGN's reviewer rated it highly, it's not a difference of opinion, but some moral failing on behalf of IGN for allowing this guy to express his thoughts on their platform. What I find especially ironic is that these same people claim to not care about what IGN thinks. You'll hear them say over and over that IGN hasn't been relevant for years, yet go fucking ballistic whenever a review goes against what they think a game deserves. Either they're relevant and it really matters to you what they say, or they aren't. It's time to pick one. Look, I'm sympathetic to the idea that people want more from their video games. The idea that AAA output broadly gets safer and less interesting year after year, I don't actually disagree with that, but we can't as a community have that opinion and simultaneously get up in arms and start a literal hate campaign when a smaller studio creates something that doesn't perfectly map onto the norms of the industry. There are legitimate criticisms that can be levied at Mixtape. You can argue that it doesn't use its medium as a video game particularly well, or that its brand of 90s nostalgia might feel inauthentic depending on your upbringing, but unfortunately, it's not the type of criticism that has gained the most traction online. It's the astroturfing allegations. It's claiming that every reviewer has been paid off by a billionaire. It's that the game isn't even a video game, and you've even got people calling the game woke for reasons they would not be able to explain to you if you ask them about it. I find it especially funny when people claim that journalism outlets are acting as a sort of hive mind trying to sway public opinion, yet somehow thousands of people on Twitter that have never played Mixtape and will never play Mixtape have the exact same opinion about it. It's a small game made by a small team, yet somehow the internet mob spun up some grand conspiracy about secret billionaire connections and industry plant allegations despite its funding being completely transparent, and both the studio and the publisher having an excellent track record and legitimate pedigree. You have endless videos online saying that critics are lying about the game, yet offering actual verifiable lies in response to it, like the idea that the game completely plays itself, or that reviewers have been paid off with absolutely no evidence to support these claims. These creators have legitimately spread misinformation, and of course, will face absolutely no repercussions for any of it. While Mixtape might be one of the most fervent examples of this type of discourse, it's far from the only game to get caught in this type of shitstorm. It's hard to forget The Last of Us Part 2's insane post-release hellscape, but more recently, Saros, a game that I really love, has been in its share of hot water. People are angry about Marathon, Subnautica 2, and even Forza Horizon 6. The list goes on. The thing is, Mixtape feels like a pretty unlikely candidate for this type of controversy. As I've said, the game is relatively tame. It's just a small-scale title from a studio that knew what they wanted it to be, yet a controversy was manufactured by grifters around it, all while claiming that the game was astroturfed into popularity. It is grade A irony. We talk so much about wanting video games to be taken seriously as art, yet whenever games subvert expectations in any meaningful way, the same people lose their minds every time. It's just such a shame that as artists are fighting to be taken seriously by the general public, we still have people that only view the games they play as nothing more than toys. We can't have it both ways, and by choosing to act in this way, you're making your stance loud and clear. Not everything has to appeal to everyone. You don't even have to like Mixtape, but you know what the normal thing to do is when you don't like something? You move the fuck on and go and find something you'll enjoy.